person, and we wish him the best. And we know that he will. Pull through and do well here, and I look forward to seeing his smiling face around these parts. This week, on the heels of the fastest economic growth in 4 decades, we continued our efforts to support the post-pandemic economy that works for the middle class and strengthens productivity and industry and makes life easier for working families. Our DPCC co-chairs are going to talk through what events House Democrats have held across this country to support the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. In my district, I had a roundtable last week with local city officials and mayors. I'm a former mayor, and I know that all of my former colleagues back home are interested and invested themselves in the success of this bill. I heard loud and clear their support for the bill, but I also heard them reiterate their support for the American Rescue Plan, which benefited local communities, funding for schools and local governments and our small businesses. This week we'll continue to strengthen our supply chain, as the chairman said, and our economy, making this country more competitive with the Competes Act. And no amount of obstruction from the Republican Party can stop us or diminish the steps that we've taken to bring our economy back from the brink and create more than 6 million jobs since President Biden was sworn in. It's my pleasure to introduce DPCC co-chair from Southern California, my colleague Ted Lieu.
Thank you, Chair Jeffries and Vice Chair Aguilar, for your leadership. Democrats are delivering for the people. We've had the fastest economic growth in nearly 4 decades, the lowest unemployment rate in 5 decades, and with 6 million jobs created since January 20th, President Biden and Democrats have achieved the fastest job growth in U.S. history in 1 year. Growth is up, wages are up, unemployment is down, and this is just the beginning. The infrastructure law is going to result in millions of more good-paying jobs, union jobs, jobs that cannot be outsourced. Democrats embarked on a challenge to do over 1,000 infrastructure events. We announced this last November to have that done by the end of January. We're very pleased that our caucus did over 1,200 events as of yesterday, 1,271 to be exact. That's over 1,200 reminders that Democrats are fighting for the people by fixing roads, bridges, highways, ports, and airports, by getting broadband everywhere, from rural areas to inner cities and everywhere in between, taking lead out of our pipes, and making sure that we continue to grow our economy. It's also over 1,000 reminders that 200 Republicans voted against fixing roads, bridges, and highways, and these good-paying union jobs. Now I'd like to turn over to Representative Dingo, who's going to talk a little bit more about these infrastructure events.
So good morning, everybody. As we said, we did 1,271, and we're still counting. We got more events, and we're going to keep them coming because we need to tell the story. The more we talk about what we do, the more people know how we're delivering for them. So these events underscore just how important the infrastructure investments are for local communities and local economies across the country. People don't know what we've done, and we are making sure that they know. We need to have you help us make sure they know what we are doing. So Rick Larson, Mike Levin, and Sherry Bustos are the winners. I was too. Each of them did more than 50 events. Rick was in the 80s. I was at 59. Mike and Sherry came in right behind. And Speaker Pelosi did a number of events leading with her colleagues, bringing members together across her delegation. Everyone was participating in this. But it's not just the sheer numbers. It's how people did it and the topics that they showcased, all the ways that this bill is making life better for people. So Angie Craig and Dean Phillips participated in a press conference together that announced $4.5 billion that the law is going to invest in Minnesota roads. Troy Carter highlighted the funding that's going to be done for bridge repairs in his district as part of his Building a Better Louisiana infrastructure tour. Sharice Davids talked to a fourth grade class so they could understand how internet was going to make it easier for them to learn. And Judy Chu highlighted investments to clean up water by touring the first PFAS water treatment facility in the San Gabriel facility. Sherry Bustos gutted a fish. And I spent 2 hours on a runway last Thursday in 0-degree weather. We're out there telling the story. So, and we're just getting started. We really want people to know how this bill is going to make a difference in their lives in so many ways, not just fixing, in Michigan, we call them the dam roads and the bridges, but from the Great Lakes to the internet to leads out of pipes. But there's so much more in there that makes everybody's life better. And that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of this year. Now let me turn it over to Joe.
Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Co-Chair Dingell, Co-Chair Liu, and also want to recognize Co-Chair Cartwright, who couldn't be with us today, but who also has been helping in this effort. Not all of us gutted fish for our infrastructure events, but as you can tell, we have a very diverse caucus. And I think to Co-Chair Dingell's point, it reflects not just the numbers, right, numerically, the volume of events that House Democrats have been engaged in over the course of the last 3 months, but ultimately the substance, right, of what we're talking about in terms of how this infrastructure law will benefit tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans throughout our country, whether it's the water treatment plant that will finally be repaired in rural parts of my state of Colorado, or the broadband infrastructure that will be deployed from coast to coast, the crumbling bridges in some of the biggest urban cities in our country. Across the board, Democrats are delivering on the promise that we made and that President Biden made to the people of our country, that we would get infrastructure done. And we did precisely that. And these events have showcased exactly what this infrastructure bill will bring to our country. And just to recap that, I know you all are well aware of it, but it is worth emphasizing. Rebuilding roads and bridges nationwide, including the largest bridge investment since the construction of the interstate highway system 7 decades ago. None of us were alive on the stage when the interstate highway system was first conceived. And this bill will now deliver the largest investment since that time, delivering clean drinking water to 10 million families in more than 400,000 schools and child care facilities nationwide, with the largest ever investment in American water infrastructure to replace lead pipes and service lines across the nation, expanding access to high-speed, reliable internet, which I already mentioned, helping families get online to work and to learn, making historic improvements to public transit, the largest federal investment in passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak, and finally supporting action to address the climate crisis, including making down payments on clean energy investments, a clean, resilient electric grid, electric vehicle infrastructure, and so much more. So at the end of the day, very clear to us, and I think clear to the American people, that we are rebuilding our infrastructure, rebuilding our middle class, creating good-paying American jobs that cannot be outsourced, and ultimately making life better for communities around our country. We are showing that the D in Democrat does stand for deliver, and we will continue to do that each and every day moving forward. With that, I'll turn it back to Chairman Jeffries for questions.
Thank my distinguished colleagues with the DPCC for their presentation. Questions?
Mr. Chair, just on the Build Back Better, yesterday Senator Manchin said that it was effectively dead. So how frustrated are you as House Democrats since you got the ball to the other side of the field, and are you worried that it could be dead the longer this drags on?
We're not frustrated. I don't believe that Build Back Better is dead. The Senate will have to work through its dynamics. We're going to continue to focus right now in the House on making sure that we pass the America Competes Act, which is going to address the supply chain issues that we're confronting right now, which has caused some inflationary issues that the American people are dealing with. I'm hopeful that our Republican colleagues will actually join us in this effort, and instead of simply talking the talk, that they'll walk the walk. The Senate dynamics will work itself out. But I think right in front of us right now is the American Competes Act. That is an important step forward for everyday Americans and the American people.
And as far as the policy and communications team are concerned, can you speak to what that means for your messaging? Do you talk about it? Do you not talk about it?
Democrats will continue to deliver for the people.
Thank you. Good morning. So obviously the administration has announced that it's forward deploying many of these troops in Romania and other places in Eastern Europe here. This is a different, the makeup of the Democratic Caucus is different than some years ago, right after 9/11, where you had one member who voted against the AUMF after that. Nobody's talking about an AUMF this time, but historically there have been resolutions and concerns expressed by Congress as it pertains to war powers. 95 Bosnia, 99 Serbia. What is that talk in your caucus, especially from those on the left who say, we are Congress, we need to assert ourselves, diplomacy is the best answer, which is something that a couple of members have said. What's the approach? What do you hear?
Well, we haven't had a caucus-wide conversation about this particular subject yet. We are going to have a bipartisan classified briefing on the situation in the Ukraine tomorrow. I'm sure members will be able to express their perspectives there. But President Biden and the administration, I believe, have been operating constructively, working with our NATO allies and our European allies to try to de-escalate the situation. And they'll continue to do the best they can, and I've got full confidence in the administration.
Do you see any divides in your caucus? And maybe Mr. Lou served in the military courts on the way on this, but any divides in the caucus between the administration's position and based on what I laid out the premise about war powers?
I think I'm going to refrain from commenting in terms of anyone's perspective until all of us have had the opportunity to hear the bipartisan briefing tomorrow.
I have a question on the Competes Act. So there are some proposals in there to crack down on human rights abuses in China. Would you say that that's just as important as the investments that we're doing in the domestic manufacturing and production?
Everything in the bill is important, and it's a collection in terms of its work product of the input from people all across the Congress on these various committees. Many of the provisions in the bill are bipartisan in nature, and I think everyone recognizes, certainly within the House Democratic Caucus, the importance of passing a bill that is going to create millions of good-paying jobs, that's going to relieve some of the supply chain pressures that we have, directly confront inflation, and ensure that American manufacturing can be competitive, that we can restore it, and that we can continue to lead in technology and innovation moving forward. And let me yield to anyone more from the DPCC if they want to add. Debbie?
I mean, it matters. We got to get it done. I mean, I come from a state where my plants are closed. We're down to 5.
Mike?
I mean, we got to get this done. Everything matters, but we've got to get in particular, we got to get the CHIPS bills done. We're down to a 5-day supply in this country. Plants have been closed in my district off and on for months. We're hearing this across the country. I'm a car girl, but it's not just car girls in Silicon Valley and Colorado and medical supplies. So we got to get this bill done, and we got to get it to conference. And I've worked with many of my Republican colleagues who know that this is important too. And I wish some days that things just didn't come down to being partisan votes, because I know that the Ohio Republican members who just got the Intel plant know how important pieces of this bill are. The supply chain is just, everybody understands supply chain. When I started at GM, I don't want to say how many years ago, nobody knew what just-in-time was. They didn't understand what supply chain was. We all now understand it, and it's not just an economic issue. It's a national security issue. Every part of this bill matters. We got to get it done. We got to get this done with the Senate, and it's got to go to the president. It matters to the country, every single provision in it.
It's also important to point out that we used to make about 35 to 37% of the chips,
40%, actually.
about 40%, although Secretary gave us a little lower number. But and now we're down to about 12%. But Secretary Raimondo made a very important point today. She said, currently we make 0% of the chips necessary for military-grade equipment, high-end computing and artificial intelligence. 0%. The Democrats are going to advance a bill to directly address this economic and national security challenge. We're hopeful that our Republicans will join us.
Sorry, just to follow up quickly, why do you think that leadership decided to put the human rights provisions in this bill?
I think that's a question that you'll have to ask people who have worked on that provision. In the back.
In terms of U.S. stock trade ban legislation, it's been sort of batted around in both the Senate and the House by Republicans and Democrats. I mean, my question is sort of to all of you, maybe a show of hands, if you support that legislation, and especially given the fact that U.S. lawmakers traded an estimated $355 million worth of stocks last year. And what would you say to people who are worried that in terms of regulating big tech, that owning stocks like Apple and Amazon is a conflict of interest?
Yeah, I'm all for the classroom setting, but we don't really do shows of hands here. I will say that there's legislation right now that has been put forth by a variety of our colleagues, all of whom are incredibly well respected, to deal with this issue. Those bills are pending before the House Administration Committee. I certainly look forward to the work product that they put forward, and I've already previously expressed my personal position on this issue.
This legislation obviously contains provisions to address the supply chain and inflation, but I'm wondering if you think that this bill covers the gamut of what the House needs to do, or does there need to be, are you planning on having additional bills that also address supply chain issues and inflation issues?
It's an incredibly important step forward for all the reasons that have been articulated, and directly addresses the challenges around supply chain issues and inflation. But the business of the people always continues, and House Democrats are always going to continue to work to do several things, much of which we've already done. Create millions of good-paying jobs, as we've done with the bipartisan infrastructure agreement. Lower costs and make sure that we provide support to everyday Americans in a changing economy. We've done that through a variety of different efforts, including the child tax credit that we're working to continue. Democrats will continue to deliver for the people in these areas. But what is in front of us right now, making sure we get the America Competes Act over the finish line. Pete? EPCC? Joe?
Yeah, sure. I would just reinforce what Chairman Jeffries articulated. It's not a myopic approach, right? The caucus has adopted a holistic approach in coordination with the Biden administration to address inflation. Of course, the Competes Act is a large step forward in addressing the problem. As the chairman put it, there are other activities as well that the House is engaged in. Just currently, for example, the House Judiciary Committee and the House Oversight Committee engaged in a number of different important investigations as it relates to competitiveness to ensure that our economy remains as competitive as possible, and that obviously also dovetails with the actions that the FTC has taken under the new commissioner, or chairwoman rather, appointed by President Biden to ensure that in particular industries where we see some of these price pressures that are far more pronounced, that we're pulling the right policy levers to ensure that the American people have access to goods at a reasonable price. So I think you will see the Congress take further steps in the coming weeks. Our members have a number of different bills, some of which are far more technical in nature, some of which are far larger in nature. And I suspect that over the course of the next 8 weeks, you'll see us consider more of those bills on the floor. But for now, the focus remains getting the American Competes Act across the finish line. And it would be nice if House Republicans would join the effort, given the incredible support that this particular bill has amongst the business community, amongst labor, and so many other stakeholders across the country.
On government funding, how confident are you that there will be some sort of deal by the end of the week, and will a short-term continuing resolution be necessary?
Well, Chair, I'm going to yield to Pete because he's on the Appropriations Committee. But Chairwoman Rosa DeLauro has been working incredibly hard to arrive at a four corners agreement. We've done our work in the House of Representatives, and hopefully Senate Republicans will see fit to proceed in a way that funds the government fully and robustly, because many of the investments that are contained in an omnibus spending agreement are necessary to improve and enhance the quality of life of everyday Americans. That's what we're all about. It's not just a ministerial bill, a spending agreement. For many people, it's a matter of life and death. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to arrive at an agreement, but a lot of that depends on the goodwill of our partners in the Senate.
I share the chairman's optimism here, but obviously we'll defer to Chair DeLauro. She's been working with her colleagues on the Senate side. They've had Four Corners meetings. They're going to continue to meet. She has not given the Democratic Caucus a full readout, but she has our complete confidence to engage in these discussions. As the chairman said, government funding should not be something that's treated like a political football. You know, this is important. It's important to fund our priorities. It's important to fund health and safety priorities. Chair McCollum led a hearing talking about the importance to the Department of Defense and our national priorities at a time when we see potential conflict. This is not the time to have a full year CR, so we want to do everything we can to avoid that. Members have priorities as well. We would like to see those addressed within this bill, and Chair DeLauro has our confidence that she has the best interest of the country and the caucus in mind as she engages in these discussions.
Last two questions, and then we'll go to the back. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, the New York maps are soon to be approved and have been labeled essentially as favoring Democrats. I'm curious if you think that undermines Democrats' message of promoting free elections.
Well, I'm going to refrain from commenting until the legislature acts. It's my understanding that they may act today, they may act tomorrow. In terms of the district that I represent, there are several communities of interest within it that have historically been kept together. As far as I can tell, they have been kept together in this particular map, but let's see what the legislature does before I make any further comment.
Does it help with the dynamics heading into midterms?
I'm not sure.
So yesterday, Congressman issued a letter warning against stirring up xenophobia with the debate of American Competes Act. I was wondering if any of you share the same concern.
The American Competes Act will make America a global leader. So we're going to pass this bill because it helps America be the #1 country in the world in a variety of industrial sectors. And this is against challenges from any country in the world. I also note that sometimes what we do see happen in U.S. history is when xenophobia against another country blows back against Americans who happen to be of Asian descent. So if you look at our country's history, we had the whole Yellow Peril hysteria that was followed by the Chinese Exclusion Act, and that was then followed by the Japanese internment. And then in the 1980s, when America feared the economic rise of Japan, there was a lot of discrimination against Americans who happened to be of Asian descent, including the murder of Vincent Chin in Detroit. So we have to just make sure that we push back and let the American people know that you do not racially profile or discriminate against Americans who happen to be of Asian descent, regardless of what you think of what any other foreign country may or may not be doing.
The organized labor community supports the effort to make sure that America can compete. The Chamber of Commerce supports the effort to make sure that America can compete. The National Association of Manufacturers supports the effort to make sure that America can compete. The business community supports the effort to make sure that America can compete. Will House Republicans support the effort to make sure that America can compete, or will they continue to play partisan political games? Democrats will continue to deliver for the people. We are going to pass the America Competes Act. Thank you, everyone.